Hello curious people, today I am here to help you. I know you are using this video to help you fall asleep. So before you like this video and subscribe to the channel, tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Make yourself comfortable now. I stepped into the stories. I've always wanted to be a mother. I remember when I was in kindergarten, all the kids were supposed to share what they wanted to be when they grew up. Most kids said things like firefighter, astronaut, doctor, cat doctor, etc. I said, mother. My teacher, Miss Moss, told me I could be a mother as well as something else and urged me to pick another dream job. I honestly couldn't think of one, but because all the other kids were staring at me, I blurted out, teacher. That made Miss Moss smile, but it made me feel bad because I knew I was lying to her. I've always hated lying to people. That's why I am going to tell you the truth, I promise. I always knew I was going to be a mother, but never in a million years could I ever have imagined I'd have a daughter like Frida. When I was in my teens, I got my first serious boyfriend, Jack. I started birth control because I knew it was the responsible thing to do. Logically, I knew I wasn't ready to be a mother, but I still couldn't help the feeling of despair that washed over me each time I swallowed another pill. Emotionally, it felt so wrong, putting this barrier between myself and my longest-held dream. Sometimes I'd even cry. These feelings became especially acute when Jack and I decided to get married. I wanted to start our family immediately, but Jack wanted us to finish university and get settled in our careers before talking about kids. I agreed that was the logical thing to do. I kept swallowing those pills while pouring my longing into journals. I'd make lists of baby names and dream about who my child would grow up to be. Would they want to be a doctor? Or perhaps an investigative journalist? Maybe their greatest desire would be to be a parent like me. I followed mommy bloggers online, memorizing their tips and tricks so I'd be ready to be the best mom ever, simultaneously wondering if my family would be as perfect as theirs. But I honestly wasn't looking for perfection. I just wanted to have a happy kid who would feel loved as their unique self. I knew whoever arrived, I was ready to love them to the stars and back. I was going to be the best mom I knew I would be. Finally, Jack and I were ready to start our family, but it turned out harder than I had expected. Much harder. Months turned into years, and every negative test hit like a knockout punch. It never got easier. It probably didn't help that I was still following those perfect mommy bloggers with their perfect families. So I started following others who were sharing about their fertility journeys. People who were struggling as much as me. That helped me start sharing my own experiences. It felt so good knowing that I wasn't alone. It felt like being a part of this amazing community of people I had never met. Each time a fellow struggler finally found success, we all congratulated them joyfully. But alone, with Jack, I'd cry. I was tired of waiting for my turn. I know this wasn't only taking a toll on me. Jack was struggling too. One day, while I was crying in his arms, he asked me, if we aren't able to have kids, would a life with just the two of us be so bad? My silence was enough for us both to understand my answer to that. Jack and I decided to use all of our savings to try IVF. The process was tough emotionally and physically. Injections, ultrasounds, waiting, but it all felt worth it to me. Then, finally, it happened. I was pregnant. The world finally felt like it made sense to me. Jack and I were overjoyed. I felt like I was walking on fluffy white clouds. That was before I knew what was coming. Tito child loss. We found out I was carrying a boy. We named him Oliver. But then, during a routine ultrasound, everything changed. The technician's silence and the doctor's grave expression told us what we didn't want to hear. Something was wrong. Those fluffy white clouds I had been walking on, they became dark storm clouds that surrounded me for the rest of the pregnancy. We knew our son wasn't going to live long after his birth. In the end, one day was all we got with our perfect boy. I loved him to the stars and back, and I still do. I just wish I could have done something more to give him more time. I couldn't help but feel I had failed him as a mother. The next days, weeks, months, passed in a haze of grief so heavy I didn't know how we'd survive it. The nursery we'd so joyfully prepared now felt like a cruel joke. Silence felt deafening, and any noise was the wrong noise. I'd like to say that our relationship grew stronger through our shared grief, but it didn't. I wanted to start trying for another baby. I thought it would help us step forward out of the darkness we had felt trapped in. I thought it would be good for us to have something to look forward to. But Jack said he wasn't ready. He said we had to build back up our savings. It didn't take me long to get him to admit that. Actually, the main reason was that he was scared about having another sick child. Jack packed his bag to stay at a hotel for a night. He said he just needed a bit of space. He never moved back. Somehow, in the midst of all this, I found myself back online, sharing my story. The responses poured in. Messages of love and shared pain. Messages I clung onto with desperation, as if each were a lifeline. I was in the bleakest part of my life, and those lifelines were essential. To make things even worse, I couldn't keep up with the mortgage, so had to list our house for sale. I shared all of this to my followers. Now I wonder, if I'd never shared anything online, would my daughter even exist? I think it was because I shared my story that the New Genesis Institute found me. Maybe Dr. Hart did personally read my posts, or maybe an algorithm pointed them towards who they were looking for. A desperate woman who would give anything, do anything, for a child. I don't know how they found me, but I know that Frigga wouldn't exist without them. It was early on a Sunday morning when I received this email. We are thrilled to extend to you an invitation to participate in an exclusive opportunity at the New Genesis Institute, a private fertility clinic dedicated to pioneering the future of human health and wellness. After learning about your fertility challenges and the heartbreaking loss you've endured, we believe you are uniquely positioned to benefit from and contribute to the groundbreaking work at the New Genesis Institute. Your journey has resonated deeply with Dr. Evelyn Hart, whose mission is not only to support those facing struggles, but also to advance the science of preventative medicine for future generations. To access your official invitation, please first sign the required NDA. There was a link to an NDA. I was nervous about clicking anything. It looked legit, but was this really some sort of horrible scam? By doing a quick search online, I learned that the New Genesis Institute was funded by Dr. Evelyn Hart, a billionaire philanthropist who had been funding health initiatives for years. There were hardly any photos of her. Dr. Hart appeared notorious for staying away from the public eye, but her name was credited on numerous scientific journals. She seemed super impressive. Dr. Hart had made her fortune early in her career when she innovated a disease testing device now used in clinics around the world. I suddenly felt something I hadn't in a long time. Excitement and hope. My heart started to beat fast in my chest. I decided to take the leap. I clicked the NDA. Heart racing now, I skimmed an extensive document. Gleaning it was meant to ensure that any and all information about the Institute would remain strictly confidential. I signed it swiftly and pressed submit. Then I was taken to my official invitation. I'll share it with you here. And yes, I do realize I am breaking my NDA, but I'm more than willing to risk all consequences to get this information out to everyone. Thank you for considering the New Genesis Institute. Founded by renowned Dr. Evelyn Hart, the New Genesis Institute is at the forefront of revolutionary research in preventative medicine, with a focus on creating healthier and stronger generations. We are conducting a series of elite fertility treatments, designed not only to help women conceive, but to ensure that future children are born with optimal health to give them the best possible chance in life. Should you decide to take part in our program, you will receive personalized fertility treatments designed by Dr. Hart and her team, accommodation during your treatment and pregnancy at the New Genesis Institute, personalized health care for the duration of your participation, financial support for you and your child in the years of their development in exchange for participation in scheduled health monitoring for research purposes. the opportunity to contribute to a better future, ensuring that the next generation is equipped to thrive. This invitation is offered to a select few individuals and is fully funded by Dr. Hart's personal investment in the future of medicine. Your resilience and willingness to embrace new possibilities have made you an ideal candidate for our program. If you want to participate in our innovative fertility program, please RSVP at your earliest convenience. We look forward to the opportunity to welcome you to the new Genesis Institute. I stared at that letter for I don't know how long, reading it and rereading it and rereading it. Then suddenly, before I even realized I was making the decision, I was responding. Thank you so much for reaching out. Yes, I would love to participate. Their response came quickly. I received an email with detailed instructions. A private car would pick me up on March 1st, followed by a flight to their facility. The email explained that the new Genesis Institute was located on a private island, a place that, from the photos in the email, looked more like a resort than a clinic. Towering palm trees and sparkling blue water surrounded white buildings that gleamed in the sunlight. It didn't seem real. But then again, no part of this whole situation felt real. It didn't bother me at the time that I couldn't find the institute on a map. They had detailed extreme secrecy in the NDA. Instead of being nervous, I preferred to embrace a dream of a different reality that took me away from my current depressing existence. Plus, it was perfect timing. I was looking for a rental starting March 1st, and as accommodation was included during my stay at the institute, I wouldn't have to worry about that. All I had to do was move all my stuff to a storage unit and let my life take me where it was going to take me. I had spent so many years trying to achieve a specific plan. Giving over to this felt right to me somehow. It felt like winning the lottery. I let that high feeling carry me to March 1st. When March 1st came, that was the first time I felt true fear. What if this was all a scam? Or worse, a joke? Was someone playing me? And if they were, why? But the car arrived precisely when it said it would, and it took me to an airport where I was welcomed onto a small plane. Apart from the crew, there were two other people on board, Claire and Mariah. I learned that they were also going to participate in Dr. Hart's treatment. On the flight, we got to know each other better. Claire and Mariah had very similar stories to my own. They both had trouble conceiving and didn't have the funds for any alternate route to motherhood. Claire was a widow, her husband died of cancer, and Mariah was recently single. Mariah also had a child who had passed away in infancy. Neither of them had any other children, but desperately wanted them. We were all so excited about being selected by Dr. Hart for her program. Claire and Mariah agreed that the whole thing didn't seem real. But like me, they let their hope for a child lead their decision to make this epic leap of faith. The plane landed on a pristine airstrip. We were greeted by uniformed staff who smiled and greeted us as if they already knew us personally. An especially friendly staff member, Lark, took us under her wing. She escorted us towards the main building where we were told we'd be introduced to Dr. Hart. Touching my feet to that island, seeing those buildings, this is when things really started feeling real for me. The facility looked amazing. There were little cottages dotted around a larger main building. Lark told us that each of us would get our own cottage for the duration of our stay. Gardens weaved throughout. Lark explained that we were free to roam the grounds of the facility, but the north half of the island had eroding cliffs that were super dangerous. A border wall made a division between that part of the island and the facility, so as long as we didn't try to get over the wall, we'd be safe. Dr. Hart emerged from the main building to greet us. She was poised and magnetic, with piercing green eyes. They weren't unkind, but had a calculating quality to them. She seemed to be assessing us from the moment she laid eyes on us. She spoke with measured confidence. "Welcome. You've made the right choice coming here. I promise we'll take excellent care of you." She urged us to explore the island and take time to get to know the other women we'd be going on this journey with. I learned there were 20 of us. Before we were permitted to start fertility treatment, we spent our days in group therapy sessions, sharing our stories, our hopes, and fears. We came from different backgrounds, different countries, even, but we all shared a unique bond. Every one of us were single. We had all suffered a tragic loss of a loved one. And we all had the seemingly impossible dream of motherhood. In the evenings, we'd wander the gardens or sit by the ocean. We'd often talk late into the night, bonding further over our excitement. But I realized that Mariah, who had seemed so excited about this opportunity on the plane, was growing increasingly nervous about being on the island. She didn't want to talk loudly about it, though, as she said we were probably being watched and listened to. She seemed scared of Dr. Hart. I kept looking for hidden cameras, but I couldn't see any. I told her she was just being paranoid. I assume now that Maria was probably right. But then, I was actually mad at her for putting a damper on everyone's excitement. Finally, the day arrived that we would be beginning treatment. We all gathered in the main building where Dr. Hart would be speaking to us. There, we realized that our group of 20 was now 14. 6 women, including Mariah, were no longer there. Dr. Hart explained that there were a few women who were assessed as incompatible for the program, and so were returned home. Dr. Hart explained our treatment process in detail. They would be using innovative science that combined traditional IVF with advanced genetic optimization techniques. She told us she had made her fortune by diagnosing problems, but she wanted to fix them. You were selected, she said, because you understand the anguish that comes with seeing a loved one held back by nothing but their own biology. You want a better life for your children. Not only will we be ensuring you conceive, we will also be ensuring your child has the strongest possible biological foundation. A healthier, brighter future for all humanity begins here. She told us that if anyone was uncomfortable with proceeding, they were welcome to step out, and they would be flown home. She also made it clear that choosing to stay would mean we'd be leaving with a child. There was no question in my mind. I was going to stay. All of the remaining women stayed. We all wanted to bring our babies home. The 14 of us then began treatment. Apart from numerous injections, it honestly felt like the best holiday I'd ever been on. We were so well cared for. We always had the best food to eat, and massages and therapy whenever we needed it. The staff were amazing. In therapy, we were encouraged to see the health benefits our children were receiving as the future of humanity. We felt good about contributing to a healthy new generation. Every single one of us became pregnant quickly. Regular scans and health checks told us our babies were growing well. I was told I'd be having a girl. I was in bliss, falling in love with my little girl who I had yet to meet. She had strong kicks inside me, so I wanted a strong name for her. I named her Frisia. I wondered if she would look like her brother. One night, Claire and I were sitting on the beach beneath the stars. Both our bellies had grown large by this time. I was stroking mine with love, but Claire just stared at hers. She made a grimace as her baby gave her a mighty kick. I could even see the press of his little foot against her stomach. Claire seemed troubled, her usual bright smile replaced by a shadow of doubt. "What's wrong?" I asked her. "Do you ever feel like there's something off about all this?" She responded quietly, her voice barely audible over the waves. "Off? No," I said quickly. But for some reason, I had the intense feeling I was lying. I pushed the feeling away because I didn't want to believe it. Not when I was so close to finally holding my daughter in my arms. "Do you understand the specific treatment they've given to us and our babies?" Claire asked. "I'm not a doctor or a scientist," I responded. "I don't understand any of that technical stuff. But I know they know what they're doing. That's all that matters to me. What if there's something, I don't know, wrong with our kids?" Claire asked me, eyes filling with tears. "There's nothing wrong. They've been monitoring them all so closely." I smiled, took her hand in mine, and said reassuringly, "I think it's just nerves. We've all been through so much to get here." Even as I said it, I wasn't sure if I was trying to reassure her or myself. The next day, Claire was in therapy practically the whole day. When she met me for dinner, she had her usual smile back on her face. "You're right. It was definitely just nerves. I don't know what came over me. I forgot how truly lucky I am to be a part of all this. How lucky my child is. Aren't we lucky? I nodded and gave her a huge hug, squeezing her tightly. We were told that for the safety of us and our babies that delivering a little early by C-section would be best. We received the delivery schedule. Claire was to be first. I was last. I couldn't help but feel angry that I would be the last of us to be able to hold my child. But I reminded myself that I'd probably forget that feeling as soon as Freja was in my arms. The deliveries were to happen over 2 days, 7 one day, 7 the next. I felt extremely restless on the day when Claire and the others were going to have their babies. I couldn't stay still. I decided to go for a walk. I walked and kept on walking. No one stopped me. The staff very busy with the deliveries. For some reason, I kept heading north. I don't know what took me there, but eventually I got to the border wall. Coming up against it made me frustrated that I couldn't keep walking. The wall was made of stone and was topped with electric wire. Pretty extreme, I thought. I couldn't help but wonder what was on the other side. At the time, I told myself that I just desperately needed something to distract myself from the agony of waiting to hold my child. But deep down, I think I was actually scared about what information they were keeping from us. I decided to climb a tree. Not easy, and pretty stupid, considering I was so pregnant, but I was consumed with seeing what was over that wall. I climbed and climbed until I could see. Row upon row of identical, simple gravestones. "Hello," I heard the voice echoing up from below the tree. I looked down to see Dr. Hart staring up at me. I hadn't heard her following me. "When did she get there?" "It's best if you come down now," she said. I climbed down as carefully as I could manage. "What is that, over there?" I asked her. We were told there were dangerous cliffs. "But that's not true, is it?" "It's a cemetery," she told me. I never wanted it hidden, but there were those at the Institute who thought our facility would be more peaceful without it in view, healthier for the mothers. "Who are they? I mean, who are buried there?" I asked her, not really wanting to know the answer. In our line of work, pushing the boundaries of science and human potential, there are moments of profound loss, she said. Not every story here has a perfect ending. The individuals memorialized, they were part of this journey, just as you are now. They entrusted us with their dreams, their deepest hopes, and though the outcomes were not what we wished, their courage paved the way for the advancements we've made today. I was speechless. I held onto my belly tightly, feeling my daughter stretching inside. "Don't be scared. We are all part of something larger than ourselves here," Dr. Hart continued. "You and your daughter will be fine. We've come a long way. Your daughter, she will be perfect." I felt myself start to hyperventilate. Breathe. Remember to breathe." I heard Dr. Hart say as darkness started to overtake my sight. The next thing I remember, I was waking up in a bed. I was terribly confused and in pain. I felt my belly, and I knew my baby was gone. "Where is she?" I shouted out. "Where's my baby? Where's my daughter?" Dr. Hart entered my room. "Cha," she said. "Your baby is fine. We delivered her. She's healthy. You fainted. We decided it was best to move up your delivery to today. But don't worry, everything went well. You and your daughter are perfectly healthy." "My daughter, Freja, can I see her?" I pleaded. "Of course you can," said Dr. Hart. She waved in a nurse, who was holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. "Freja." When I looked at her, I knew immediately she was mine. She reminded me so much of Oliver. Her little button nose was the same as his, which matched mine also, and she had the same dark hair with soft waves to it. But she was a lot bigger than Oliver. She seemed so much stronger, and her eyes were wide open, taking in everything with total awareness. The nurse asked if I'd like to feed her, passing me a bottle with formula. I asked if I could breastfeed her, but Dr. Hart told me that wouldn't be a good idea. She lifted Frieja's lips to show that she had a full row of gleaming pointy teeth. I was shocked. Dr. Hart reminded me that my daughter was given biological advantages to ensure she'd thrive. She then picked up a scalpel and sliced into Frieja's little leg. Frieja let out a wail. I pulled my baby away from Dr. Hart. "What are you doing?" I screamed at her. "Look," she said. "Your daughter is fine." I looked down to Frieja's leg to see. The cut had closed. In front of my eyes, it healed. "You will never need to worry about your child being sick or hurt," Dr. Hart said. "She's perfect." I looked down at my daughter. She had stopped crying. Her little wide eyes were now watching me. "Yes, she is perfect," I said. "I love her to the stars and back, and always will." Dr. Hart smiled. "We spent Frieja's first year on the island with the rest of the Genesis children. That's what we called the children born to us 14. It was a dream. Frieja grew quickly. All the children did. They all hit milestones far ahead of schedule. Frieja crawled at 2 months, walked at 5, and her first words were eerily articulate for someone barely out of infancy. From her first days, her eyes, full of curious intelligence, seemed to hold more understanding than they should. I marveled at all of her achievements. Claire and I got closer in the year 2. She watched her son, Kian, grow with as much amazement as me. Any worries she had before seemed to be washed away, seeing him laugh and play with his friends. After the first year, Dr. Hart arranged for us all to transition into the real world. Frieja and I were placed in a fully furnished apartment. It was beautiful, a dream, really, knowing that was our home. I should have felt comfortable there. But the first night, I couldn't fall asleep. I was super restless. I tossed and turned for hours. I settled myself thinking I was probably just missing the comfort of the island. The family I'd formed between the mothers, children, and staff. Finally, I fell asleep. I dreamed about the island. Dreamed about Frieja and I in our cottage. But in my dream, I left Frieja. I walked away, north, to the cemetery. I got to the wall, and it loomed over me. So I pushed, and pushed and pushed, until it crumbled. Beyond it were the gravestones, and Mariah. She was standing there, half buried in a grave. And she was staring right at me. I woke with a start. I tried to shake the nightmare of Mariah from my head, but it was almost as if I could hear her voice whispering. I couldn't hear what she said, but it made me remember about what she had said on the island about cameras. I got out of bed, and I searched every corner, but couldn't find anything. I felt foolish for looking. We had regularly scheduled health checks with the Institute staff, so they didn't need to be watching us 24/7, I told myself. I went back to bed. Frieja thrived. She excelled in school. Almost too much, though. She continued to be placed ahead of her age group. It made it a bit challenging for her to find friends. But she had fun in sports. She joined the swim team and was winning gold medals almost as soon as she started. And she loved painting. I kept in contact with Claire, who lived in the same city as me. Claire noticed that Kian was having challenges making friends too. It made her sad because she remembered how happy he was with the Genesis kids. I made a point of scheduling more play dates so Kian and Frieja could hang out. The two got on really well. They were almost like siblings. Frieja and I had a wonderful time in her childhood. She'd tell me everything. About kids at school, her favorite books, what shape she thought the clouds looked like, and how she wanted to paint them. She'd break into a huge smile when she saw me cheering her on at swim meets. We'd spend hours together, her words flowing like a babbling stream. She trusted me with everything, and I relished every moment with my beautiful, strong, brilliant daughter. Every second with her felt like a miracle. When Frieja was around 15, things began to shift. I noticed her temper seemed to flare more if she was hungry. I figured that was a pretty normal teen thing. I didn't think much of it, just prepared myself for perhaps a rocky teen phase, and made sure to stock the fridge well. Then Frieja started being obsessed with meat, which was weird, because she used to turn her nose up at it. Now it was all she ate. She'd even push away the macaroni and cheese I'd make for her, which used to be her favorite. One day, I caught her licking a raw steak. I asked what she was doing, and she just snapped at me. What? I was hungry. I took the meat away from her and immediately scheduled a health check with the institute. They did some tests and told me that Freja just needed more iron in her diet. They gave me a strict meal plan for her. They told me to reach out again if anything else changes. I called Claire to see if Kian was having any issues. She told me he just had a health check as well and was given his same diet. She sounded weary. I asked if everything was ok. She confided in me that Kian was having a really hard time at school. He wasn't getting on with the other kids at all, picking fights, which he'd win every time. Claire said it looked like he may be expelled. She said she had talked to the institute about it. They said that if he couldn't manage public schooling, they would arrange a suitable boarding school for him. I hung up, thankful that Freja's problems weren't so bad in comparison. Freja managed pretty well with her new meal plan. She seemed happy. That made me happy. Then Claire called me one day, sobbing. She said that Kian was gone. Gone? I asked, my heart plummeting into my stomach. My first thought, for some reason, was that when she said, gone, that she meant dead. She was that distraught. But no, she explained that something had happened at his school. The institute felt it best to take him and to school him in their private boarding school where he could be more closely monitored, where his lessons would match his intelligence level better. Claire said that she wasn't able to visit him, just have him for holidays. I told her that if he was having challenges in the regular system, then boarding school would probably be great for him. She agreed. I reminded her that Christmas was just around the corner and that she'd be able to see him so soon. But then Claire said that she wished they'd keep him for Christmas too. I was shocked. What do you mean? I asked her. Then she whispered so quietly I could hardly hear her, because I'm scared of him. I tried to reassure Claire that boarding at the institute would help Kian calm down. They know what they're doing, I said. She said, yes, right, of course, and said goodbye. I hung up, feeling rather rattled. I found Freja, who was reading in bed, and kissed her goodnight. That night I had that nightmare again, the one with Mariah in the graveyard. I woke up covered in a cold sweat. I got up out of bed to change and toss my soaked PJs in the wash. Then I noticed Freja's bedroom door was open. I looked in. She was gone. I looked about the apartment. Freja. I called out, but there was no answer. I panicked. I ran out into the hall. Freja. I shouted. Then I saw her. She was emerging from our neighbor's apartment. What are you doing? I asked her. Then she turned to me, and that's when I saw it, the blood. Blood dripping down her mouth. I ran to her. Freja, what happened? Are you ok? I asked. Freja looked up at me with a look of almost shock on her face. I was hungry, she answered plainly. I pushed into our neighbor's apartment to see the body. Bloody, broken, chunks of flesh torn from it. I felt Freja grasped my arm tightly. Mom, I didn't want to kill anyone, I swear, she said. I was just hungry, starving. I had to eat. I felt myself begin to hyperventilate. Mom, breathe. I heard Freja say as darkness clouded my vision. Please, breathe. The next thing I remember is staff from the institute in my apartment. How and when they got there, I have no idea. But I saw there was still blood on Freja. They told me that they would take care of everything. That Freja needed special monitoring. They told me that she'd be taken care of in their private boarding school, where Kian is. I managed to get out. Yes, I was told. Actually, Dr. Hart has decided that it will be best for all of the Genesis children to be schooled together from now on. A controlled environment where they can learn to manage their differences. They told me that they would keep in contact. I was so shocked that all I could do was nod. They started to usher Frigga to the door. I jumped up. I wrapped Frigga in a big hug and told her I loved her, that I would always love her. Then they were gone. Then I just sat there for hours, wondering if what I told my daughter was true. I told her I loved her. How could that be true? She just killed someone, ate them. I was horrified, disgusted. It made my head swim. My beautiful, strong, brilliant daughter is, what? A monster. I puked onto the floor in front of me. But I knew what I said wasn't a lie. I still loved my daughter, and I knew I still wanted to protect her. I trusted that the Institute would help her. They knew what they were doing, right? I called Claire and told her that Frigga would be joining Kian at the boarding school. I wanted to tell her why, but I found I couldn't. I skirted around the truth, instead telling her that I truly believed they were both in the right place. Staff at the Institute gave me updates on Frigga. I was told she was taken back to the island with the other Genesis children where a boarding school was set up. I was assured they had the best teachers available. At first, the updates about Frigga came regularly. The Institute staff told me that she was adjusting well to life among the other children, and Frigga would write me letters. We were able to keep up a connection at the beginning, but over time, the updates grew sparse. Then Frigga stopped replying to my letters. When I tried to call, the staff were polite but evasive. Eventually, the communication stopped entirely. It had been 2 years since I last saw Frigga. It terrified me when I wasn't able to contact anyone. I was desperate for any type of communication. What if Frigga was hurt, and I didn't know? What if she was dead? I wanted to go to the island, but I had no idea where it was. Claire urged me to leave it. She said it was best to just let the Institute take care of things. She reminded me what I told her. They know what they're doing. Then the news broke. A staff member from the Institute, one of the survivors, she was the one that went to the media. When she was interviewed, I recognized her immediately. Lark. I remember how happy and kind she was welcoming me to the island. Now her face looked haunted. She shared footage of the massacre. I hardly recognized the island when I saw it first. It was no longer an oasis. CCTV footage captured what looked like scenes from a horror film. Bodies of staff members, ripped apart, lay strewn across the grounds. Multiple video angles, all around the facility, all over the gardens. The footage showed Lark cowering by a group of Genesis children, pleading for her life. I say children because that's how I knew them. But they didn't look like children anymore. They looked like strong young adults in their 20s. But I immediately recognized the person leading the group. It was Kian. I scoured the other faces for Frigga, hoping with all my soul I wouldn't see her amongst these faces covered in blood, predator eyes gleaming with the hunt. But she was there. My heart sank when I saw her. But then, at the same time, it lifted. She was alive. My daughter was alive. We will let you deliver the message, Kian told Lark. Humanity has had its time, he said. We are the future. Then Kian turned to speak directly to a CCTV camera. They thought they could control us, he shouted. They thought they were superior because they made us. No, we are stronger, faster, smarter. Humans are below us. Why should we bow to them? Why should we be caged? Those behind him cheered defiantly, including Frigga. They all turned and left. Lark, left alive, shook with sobs. The CCTV footage then showed the children getting on boats and leaving the island. The news then showed how the island was swarmed by police and international investigators. Of course, I'm sure you've probably seen all this. Bodies were identified, but Dr. Hart, who had funded the Institute, was not among them. There is no evidence of where she could be. All other CCTV footage and Institute files appear to have been destroyed. They are currently readying to start an extensive exhumation of the cemetery found on the north part of the island. I spent nights, all waking hours, combing through the news, desperate for any sign of Frigga. The attacks have now become widespread. It seems the children have probably split into smaller hunting groups. They strike swiftly, devouring adults, teens, children, anyone they can find. Then they disappear, as if becoming one with the shadows, only to reappear somewhere else when they become hungry again. No one knows where they stay in between attacks. I know everyone is afraid. For my part, I am sorry, but I still love Frija. I can't stop loving my daughter. When I first saw the footage, I, like many of you, I'm sure, ran to lock my door immediately. I was terrified too, but then I unlocked it. Because, truthfully, I want my daughter to return to me. I told you I wanted to tell you the truth. My daughter is missing, and I want to find her. I want to wrap her in my arms and keep her safe. I love her to the stars and back. I want her to be happy. That's all I've ever wanted. That's what a good mother does, right? And I'll be completely honest with you now, because I hate telling a lie. I'm not sure what lengths I will go to make sure she's happy. But I want to make sure good people aren't hurt, killed, eaten. Not when there are bad people out there. If my daughter needs meat, needs blood, there's no reason for her to feed on good people. I don't want you to be eaten. I promise you that. Because you're good people, right? Right. I know you are. My daughter is missing. But I don't want you to find her. I can find more suitable food for her, I promise. My mom died quite suddenly and unexpectedly of a hospital infection about 4 months ago. But that, if you can believe it, wasn't the worst thing. And her younger sister, my bubbly bright aunt, took up with my dad less than 2 months after her death. But that wasn't the worst thing either. The worst was yet to come. It started on a dull evening. I just had supper with my aunt and dad, barely able to stand her friendly chatter about school. I went upstairs to my room as soon as I could to do my homework. I stared at my laptop screen, pretending to look at my assignment, but in reality I was swooning in grief and missing Mom. I couldn't concentrate on anything since she died. I minimized the assignment tab and looked at the photo I used as background. It was taken a few years ago, a happy family occasion. My mom and aunt sitting side by side, so like yet unlike, my dad next to Mom, and I was leaning against him. All of us were smiling. Mom had both her arms stretched out around her sister and her husband. The chat box in the bottom left-hand corner of my screen began flashing. I was mildly surprised. It was an older app that no one really used anymore. I had been meaning to delete it. And then I froze. Mom's little image blinked in the chat box. And then the words popped up. "Hello, Thelma. It's me, Mom." Fear gripped my throat. I knew it must be some hacking thing or stupid error, but I was paralyzed. I turned round and glanced at my bedroom door. It was closed, although the sounds of TV from the living room still came wafting in. Aunt Claudia had the TV on whenever she was downstairs, even if she was not watching it. "Don't be scared, Thelma. It's really me. I found a way to talk to you, my darling precious child. I've been missing you so much." If this was a hacker's joke, it was the cruelest joke in the world. Against my will, tears began welling in my eyes, spilling out. "Oh, my darling, please don't cry. It's awk, and it's no use crying anyway. I need you to save that energy." My fingers still stiff from fear, I managed to type out a response. "Mom, what do you mean? Is that you really?" I could sense her familiar frustration rushing back through the laptop, same as when she felt I wasn't being smart or strong enough when she was alive. "Of course, Thelma, it's me. And I've come back to tell you something important. I had my own important news to share. Did you know Aunt Claudia moved in last weekend?" "Yes, Thelma. I know. And this is what gave me the strength to come and tell you. Please be strong. I know you are a strong girl, and you can deal with this. I am sorry you have to. But you have to know. I have to tell you. She can't have everything. My life, man, house, child. A different kind of fear took over me. Mom, what do I mean? Thelma, I'm sorry to put this on you like this. I don't know what else to do. You have to know. Aunt Claudia murdered me. The bottom of my world gave way as I dropped into a dark hole of dread and fear. I felt as if I had known this all along, all through the past 4 months. Ever since that awful night when Aunt Claudia called from the hospital, where she worked, to talk to Dad. I just couldn't say it. Thelma, are you listening to me? If I had any doubts that the laptop chat was really my mom, those words dispelled them. I heard them in the exact voice she always used to say those very words to me. Yes, Mom. But how? She was at the hospital, you know. When I went in, she wasn't on my floor, but it was very easy for her to arrange for me to pick up an infection. Thelma. The door opened, and Aunt Claudia poked her head in. I gave a little scream and frantically minimized the chat box. Aunt Claudia stepped forward. Oh, honey, you look like you've seen a ghost. Are you ok? Wordlessly, I nodded. Aunt Claudia sighed. Thelma, sweetheart, I miss your mom too. But this moping isn't doing you any good. It's hurting your dad, you know. Do you want him to suffer more? I shrugged. I couldn't speak. I looked up at her. The light was odd on her face. She looked more like Mom than ever before, but also not. And these clothes, Thelma. She reached out and touched my black sleeve, and I flinched back as though she had hit me. She frowned, and for an instant I thought she was actually going to slap me. But then she smiled and said, I know girls your age like to wear black all over, but what do you say, me, and you have a trip to the mall, and pick you up some nice new gear. On me. Simon, sweetheart, it will be so much fun. I shook my head furiously. Tears of rage, grief, and fear splatter out. Aunt Claudia began again. Oh, Thelma. But then she stopped and went quiet. I looked up at her face. She was pale and had a horrible expression. She was staring at my laptop. I followed her line of sight, turning around to look at my screen. The photo had changed. There was a new photo in background, showing Mom seemingly asleep in a hospital bed, and Aunt Claudia by her side, bent over her. Aunt Claudia seemed to jolt into life. Her face twisted into a terrible snarl. She screamed, Are you playing tricks on me? And she lunged towards me. I cringed back in my chair, raising my hands to defend myself against her onslaught. P-I-N-G-G. This time, it was a message from Sid. Sid. Dude, don't mess with me. Ok. Me. What do you mean? Sid. You're not here. No one's around. And why is the streetlight not working? Me. I'm in my car. Sid. And where's your car? Me. Next to the curb. The darkened windows blocked my view, but I kept tapping on them to let Sid know I was right there. Sid. Are you sure? Was I sure? I didn't understand. Why was he making a fuss about it? PNG. A photo from Sid. I opened it. It was the view from our front porch. As my eyes followed the driveway to the curb, I was shocked to see that the spot where my car should have been parked was empty. His ID. Is this another one of those drunk pranks from you and your friends? I was too stunned to answer. The photo didn't make sense to me at all. Sid. Yeah, I'm going back inside. Stay at your friends or whatever. Good night. I started shouting his name from inside the car, but there was no response. He had stopped replying to my texts and calls. I wondered if I could snap a photo of the driveway from my angle to show Sid that I was really here. I took a deep breath and switched on the camera. Then I unlocked the car door and stepped out. As soon as my feet hit the road, I took a photo. When I returned to the driver's seat, I unlocked my phone and opened my gallery. I couldn't believe my eyes. The flash of my camera had captured a strange sight. Standing a few feet away from my car was what I could only describe as a tall, shadowy figure. Its form was hard to make out, but it had an eerie, unnerving presence. The figure seemed to be standing on long, inhuman limbs, and something about it just didn't feel right. I froze, disbelief clouding my thoughts. There was nothing in the driveway when I stepped out. I was sure of it. Screech. A strange sound echoed against my darkened window. I gasped and quickly started the engine, pressing the accelerator hard. Down the straight road, I took a sharp right, then another left, and kept driving. The streets were empty, expected, since it was 2 a.m. I kept turning down random streets, trying to clear my head, but my heart was still racing. It took a while for my breath to return to normal. I passed by the church I used to visit when I was younger. The door was closed, but I could see lights on inside. Father Romano always kept the church open for anyone who wanted peace. I definitely needed some of that peace. My hands were tired, and my eyes were heavy with exhaustion. But I didn't feel ready to rest yet. I stopped under a bridge and took a few deep breaths. The shadowy figure was nowhere to be seen around, but I couldn't be so sure. I took out my phone and opened the camera. This time, I got out of my car, facing behind, and clicked a photo. When I was transported back into the driver's seat, I checked the photo and a sigh of relief came over me. It was empty. The entire street was empty. I perused the entire photo, every corner, but I could see nothing. I took another deep breath. My mind wondered how I ended up in this disposition. I remembered going to a friend's party and having a few drinks there, but I didn't drink much because I knew I had to drive back home. However, I have absolutely no idea when I left the party and when I sat in the car. In fact, I don't even remember whose party it was. Less than a mile ahead of me, I could see a toll plaza with its lights on. I wasn't sure if there were people there since the barriers appeared to be open. In fact, I wasn't sure if the toll plaza was even operational since I hadn't been around this highway often. As I pondered over the events of the night while gazing at the stars, I noticed the lights at the toll plaza go off. Still no signs of any employee coming out of there. Few seconds later, a streetlight near the toll plaza also shut off, and then the next one did too. Another streetlight died down. I could feel the goosebumps prick on my arms. The next lamp dwindled down too. Desperation gnawed at me as I fumbled for my phone. I opened the door as another streetlight switched off. Getting out, I decided to take a burst of photos before I got transported back inside. In the car, I started checking the photos as the next light went out too, and I saw a horrific sight. The road in front of me was flanked on both sides by not one but two of the shadowy figures like the one from before, with their deformed legs stretching out. It seemed like they were walking. They must have been 200 meters ahead of me. I swiped to the next photo. 150 meters. They were now looking towards the car. Next pic. 100 meters. Next pic. 50 meters. I hit the accelerator just as the last streetlight ahead of me died down. And then, thud. My car bumped into thin air. The figures, I thought. My brakes brought the car to a screeching halt as I hit the reverse gear and turned. Thud. Screechah. My windshield erupted in a cacophony of shattered glass. Panic surged through me as shards of glass rained down and cold air surged through my face. I couldn't figure out where they were attacking me from, but I held my breath and made a quick U-turn, then pressed the accelerator all the way down. I made a couple of quick turns. Soon, I came back to the street where my old church was. Taking another turn down the lane, I observed that the doors were open, but the lights were off. I arrived at a junction of 4 roads. Straight ahead, I noticed streetlights in the distance switching off again. There was a traffic light towards the right side of the road, which was blinking with a yellow color given how late it was. I was about to turn when I saw the traffic light break down too. I swerved left. Thud. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. I'm sorry. The reason I spoke up about money is that thanks to our hard work as a family, we were able to afford a decently sized house with a large yard that houses Samantha's safe space. Her treehouse. She's loved it since the day it was built, and it's where she would spend hours playing, drawing, and watching her favorite show on a laptop I'd left up there. Looney Tunes. I must say I never discovered its appeal. Some jokes were too weird to put in a children's cartoon, and I never was a big fan of cartoons in the first place. But as long as it keeps Sam happy, I'd tell myself, and here I'd be watching episode after episode with her. Every so often, when my work and the weather would permit it, Samantha and I would have a slumber party in the treehouse, of course watching Looney Tunes, playing pretend, and whatever else she'd want us to do. I never said no to anything, and she damn near burst from happiness every time I told her we can climb up there for the night. Unfortunately, there was a period of 2 or 3 months where I'd have to take extra shifts and most of the time be gone for a big part of the day, having to leave Samantha at her grandparents' place, half an hour drive away, or that they'd have to come watch her. That meant no slumber parties. Now you might ask why her grandparents never gave her that simple fun. Well, I wish I could answer you. My parents both passed away a while back, and I never got along with Lily's parents, even less after her death. My guess would be because they were now anchored to me for the rest of their lives thanks to Sam, and when I wasn't there to take the verbal abuse, my daughter would be the one having to listen to them babble on about stuff no 4-year-old would, excuse my language, give a shit about. Our biggest arguments were about how they would let Sam sleep in the treehouse on these warm nights on her own. I'd always yell at them how she could get hurt climbing up or down, even more so if she was to go to the house in the middle of the night. Thankfully, once that period of double shifts and additional work hours was over, Sam was back in my care again, and I could tell she was happier that way. But I was in for a surprise just a few days after. His name's Looney, Sam told me while I was tucking her into bed one evening. Like Bugs Bunny. Oh, I replied, eyebrows rising. My daughter never had an imaginary friend before. In fact, she found the idea pretty silly in her own words when I explained what that was to her after she learned about it from other kids. That's a funny name. Is he a bunny too? No, he's just Looney. He's funny and always smiling. He makes me smile too. Like this. She threw her arms up and put on a very exaggerated smile, which looked way too forced, and as if it would hurt if she kept it on for more than 2 seconds. He lives in the treehouse and plays with me. I kissed her on the forehead and turned the lights off, telling her good night. Her imagination's going to go crazy soon, I told myself, then smiled to myself a little, realizing that this was one more thing to keep her mind occupied and away from thinking about her mother. Over the next few weeks, Looney would become a regular topic of conversation. Sam would tell me about the games they play up in the treehouse, which, unsurprisingly, were mostly games a child could play on their own, or they would simulate another kid playing with them. Looney would tell her jokes that always made Sam laugh, but when she'd tell them to me, I'd always just fake laugh, failing to find the punchline. They were always random questions and a nonsensical answer. Some weeks later, when I was preparing to run to the shop around 5 minutes from us, I went to tell Sam. She's smart enough to be left alone for such a short time at this age, so there never was a problem. She was outside in the yard playing close to her treehouse, looking up and laughing, throwing a ball up which would roll back down every time. She must have been throwing it pretty hard and accurately at the wall, considering there's no incline inside. Sam, honey, I'm going to the store. Don't touch any dangerous things, right? You remember. She looked at me after she threw the ball up into the treehouse, but it didn't roll down this time. Okay, Daddy, she replied and went back to looking up at the treehouse. We can play after that if you want. I'm sorry, I was busy with work. It's okay, me and Looney are playing. Oh, is that so? Maybe I can play with you too when I come back, so you can finally introduce me. Sam looked up at the treehouse again, and after a few seconds of silence, and just looking, she turned to face me again with her face looking down and arms crossed. Looney says you're too big to play, Daddy. I was slightly hurt but said that's fine and left for the store. Samantha was quiet the rest of the night. Things began to get stranger after that. Anytime I saw Sam playing on her own, or I guess with Looney, she'd quiet down or stop playing entirely. She'd talk about him less, and every time I would ask if she's upset because of Looney, she would ignore me. It got to the point where I was getting angry. I couldn't comprehend her being more upset because of some imaginary friend than about her mother. One night when she was acting particularly strange, while I was tucking her in, she talked about Looney herself after a while of not hearing anything about him. Looney is angry with me. Is that why you've been so quiet? Yes. He wants me to sleep in the treehouse. I said you wouldn't let me. He's not real, Sam. She tried to interrupt me, but I cut her off. You can't let your imagination bring you down like this. It's silly. He is real, Daddy. She shouted at me. I was taken aback. He lives in the treehouse, and he said he will hurt you if you don't let me. Samantha was grounded for a few days after that argument. This was no way to speak to her father. She was never a problematic child, and now some stupid invisible buddy was ruining our relationship. I had to get her to stop. And I figured the only way to do that was to put my foot down finally and stop playing pretend with Looney and all that nonsense. During these days, though, I have to admit, I was thinking about what my daughter said, that her friend lived in the treehouse. She never acted like this before. She never made things up. I decided that the next morning I would go up the treehouse after so much time of not climbing up there and bring her things down until she started behaving like normal again. I didn't get to that, though. The same night I was woken up by thumping in the corridor coming towards my room and crying. Samantha basically bashed the door in, her face completely red and streaked with tears, her eyes barely open. She lunged at me, landing on my stomach while I was still trying to process everything, almost leaving me without air. Before I could even ask what was wrong, she began yelling into my chest, her terrified voice muffled, and her little arms gripping onto me so tight that it made breathing difficult. Looney broke my window, Daddy. He's angry and keeps telling me to play with him. My heart sank, and my first thought was to hide Sam under the bed, the same place from where I pulled out my baseball bat. Ignoring the fact I was only in my underwear and could barely see anything in front of me, I ran through the corridor, moving through the living room and bursting into Samantha's room, the adrenaline in me forcing me to look first around the room for any intruder, not at all noticing that the window was in fact broken by a limestone laying in the middle of all the glass. After I checked everywhere someone could hide, behind the door, under the bed and the closet, I yelled out into the darkness and walked slowly towards the window, trying to peer around the edges to see if I could see anything. The moonlight outside was faint, but it allowed me to see the completely empty yard. Then my eyes traced the tree leading up to the treehouse and was frozen in place, realizing that all of it was real, having just locked eyes with Looney. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. I don't know what he, or it, or whatever that was thinking at that moment. But I wasn't scared at first. I was confused. Looney's proportions were so wrong. His limbs were unnaturally long, and I think I even saw an extra joint somewhere along the arms. His torso was so skinny you could see the ribs. I can't even begin to describe his head. The best thing I can say is that it was just vertical. The eyes so close together, shining in the darkness, and the mouth so wide that it stretched to the side of its cheeks, locking that thing into a permanent smile. I don't know if there was any hair on the head or limbs or anything. I don't even know if that was a human or some creature. It was standing right at the entrance of the treehouse, having to bend in order to fit under it. Only after I came to realize what I was looking at did the terror run through my body, chilling every part of it, and making me drop the bat. Looney didn't descend the ladder or jump. He crawled down the tree like some animal, and then trudged off, lifting its legs effortlessly over the fence and disappearing into the woods beyond the yard. I must have stood there for at least 10 more seconds trying to process everything before chaotically running back. The only things I grabbed on the way being my car keys and Samantha. I don't know how far over the speed limit I was driving, but we were at her grandparents' place after what seemed like forever, and we haven't been back since. I haven't even called the police. What do I even tell them without being brushed off as someone with nothing better to do? I've been seeing this thing in my nightmares, and so has Samantha, who's barely been able to sleep herself. Even her grandparents are calling me mad, despite their granddaughter backing up the story and describing the same thing I saw, even if in a more childish manner. I have no idea what's happening back home. Our closest neighbors are a short drive away, and nobody's gonna see the broken window considering it's on the back of our house. For all I know, that things come back to trash everything looking for my daughter, and I'm afraid it's going to keep looking for her. What sends chills through my body every time I think about this, though, is not the creature itself, but how the whole time Samantha was playing with it, saying how it lived in the treehouse. She was not imagining it. If you stumble upon a free platform called the Mosradale Learning Academy, please do not interact with their content, or you will pay the ultimate price. Their courses used to be available back in the day and 100% free. Anyone could just stumble upon a flyer, their one and only method of advertising. Place an order via a certain email that no longer exists nowadays, and receive a free VHS or DVD of the requested course, depending on the era. I remember that there were 3 sections advertised only at the beginning of a course, which are the adults, teens, and kids sections. The available courses I still remember seeing are music, dancing and physical education, acting, drawing and design, literature and grammar, algebra and geometry, programming and cybersecurity, chemistry, physics, nutrition, and many more. All of them supposedly taught by the same tutor, who is only known as Mosradale. Today there are no traces of the media formats, but the video courses would just pop up randomly according to search results, uploaded by a nameless channel with no profile picture. That was the case for me, at least. The videos themselves would have random yet decent number of views, but with 0 likes, dislikes, and comments. My name is Holga. I am here to be a voice for myself and the 2 other names I have for you, Betty and Keiko, 2 beautiful souls that are no longer among us to speak for themselves, so I will do it for them, reporting facts obtained from relatives and close acquaintances. Victim: Betty, 1990-1997. Course: Music, Piano Lessons. Year: 1997. Please allow me to start with the case that breaks my heart the most, so that I can find the strength to continue with the rest. This is the tragic story of little Betty. Since her very early years, Betty always displayed a real fascination and attraction for music and musical instruments, with her 2 favorites being the flute and the piano. It is unclear how her parents saw the flyer from the Mosradale Learning Academy, but they ordered a piano course and received a VHS shortly after. They never saw who delivered the package. Big mistake. According to my source, one of her relatives, the tutor, Mosradale on the tape, was a slightly older boy, apparently from Spain, of maybe 13 years old, thus getting Betty more excited and comfortable for the learning process. The first sessions went well, to the point that Betty's parents would grant her the privacy to learn alone, in her room, with her own TV, player, and piano. However, things started to get concerning when her parents would hear her and also find her learning and playing at odd hours, from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. for example. Betty started sleeping during classes and skipping school, strangely obsessed about her piano lessons that it seemed nothing else mattered for her. Soon, it became clear that there was a song, the only song she would play each time she could, or hum or sing when she could not play, and she would as well do it at odd hours. Her parents decided to stop the piano lessons and confiscated the VH tape and the piano for her own good. Despite those measures, she would still wake up in the middle of the night to hum or sing the song, plunging her parents into despair, before proceeding to harass her parents during the day, so that they released the VHS and the piano. Her parents sent complaints to the academy through their email, to no avail. One night, her parents found Betty apparently sleepwalking and trying with her eyes closed to open the room where the piano and the VHS were locked away, while calmly humming the song. Her mother wanted to shake her, but the father stopped his wife, curious about what was occurring. Betty then stopped everything all of a sudden, standing still in front of the door for at least 10 minutes. When the parents decided that it was enough, and they made the first steps towards their daughter, Betty used her right hand to push the door, and it violently shattered into pieces, allowing her to enter the room. When her parents shook her, she screamed and fought them, as if she was afraid of them. The same day, at around 11 a.m., Betty's parents contacted a child psychologist who was on her way to attend to the little girl. Meanwhile, they let Betty learn and play in her room, to appease her and also to allow the psychologist to see the circumstances for herself. They heard her play the song again and again until the psychologist arrived, and she also, along with the parents, heard the melody and went to Betty's door. However, the moment they opened the door, Betty, the VHS tape, and even the flyer were gone, leaving behind the piano, the player, and the television on static, and especially distraught parents who for the rest of their lives have been crushed by their loss. To add more to the torture, they would sometimes hear someone playing the song on the piano locked in her room, but the moment they opened the door, everything would stop. They eventually had to break and throw the piano away. You cannot see me typing this, but maybe through my words you can feel the tears that I shed. For crying out loud, she was only 7 years old. 7. But okay, what can be done at this point? Victim, Keiko, 1989, 2014. Course, Drawing and Design. Year, 2014. Keiko was a bubbly woman filled with a passion for art and crafts. Around the 2010s, the world was really buzzing with everything art and design, and Keiko wanted to take her passion to the virtual realm, as she felt that her culture has design wealth that could largely contribute to the movement. According to her husband at the time, she found the course randomly on a video platform and decided to explore. Once again, big mistake. According to him, the tutor Mosradale seemed to be a young man of around their age and from the West. As usual, the first sessions were okay. Keiko retrieved the video each time she needed to from the browser history, as even keywords would not work in the search bar, but she dismissed it. She followed instructions, bought a drawing book and pencils to practice on paper before moving things to the screen. She was very happy about the lessons and the designs that she painted, some of them on several doors of their house. Soon, they started to hear strange knocks on the doors at various times during the day or the night, only to verify and see that nobody was behind the doors or in the rooms. Sometimes, they would open a door, expecting to see the bathroom, but would see the living room instead, and mysteriously find themselves there, holding the door. One time, their baby crawled through a door and disappeared for at least 24 minutes before reappearing through another one completely and fortunately unharmed. Keiko would be the recipient of horrible nightmares in which the doors would open and let strange beasts invade their home and rip them apart. She would also sleepwalk and draw strange symbols on the walls or in her drawing book, effectively intensifying the bizarre occurrences in the house. The day they decided to leave that house, Keiko went back in to fetch something and never came back out. When her husband went to look for her, he saw the symbols on the walls and doors emit a strange light and catch fire so vividly that it burned down the whole house. At the same time, Keiko's computer and her sketchbook also caught fire and were destroyed totally. She was never found and left behind a grieving husband and their little son. Victim, Holga, 2001, 20. Course, Dancing and Physical Education. Year, 2024. I have always been a dancing addict. People know me for not being able to stay still. It does not matter if it is out of joy or to let any negative feeling out or to get my mind off things. I have to dance. I explored many genres from different parts of the world, and it is with the intention of discovering new ones that I made a search on the web and stumbled upon a free course from Fat Academy and unfortunately took it. Monumental mistake. Mind you, at that point in February, I did not know anything about Betty, Keiko, or any other person who unfortunately interacted with the academy. Mosradale on the video I clicked on was a young Asian woman of around my age, and she introduced me to new dances she claimed existed before the year 700. I found it interesting and imagined how I could merge the very old and the very new to create something unique. The first lesson did not really impress me, to be honest, and since it was just some free and random video on the web, I did not really want to continue, but I somehow felt compelled to come back. Again and again and again. Soon, I was deep inside the course, and the movements were getting harder to learn and reproduce, but I was slowly getting there. One day, the tutor taught me how to prepare a certain mixture that was key to the next level. I blindly followed the instructions and applied it on specific parts of my body before proceeding with the dance session. The mixture dried up, almost like sunk inside my skin, as soon as I started the video, and for once, I was really dancing and reproducing all the moves with strange ease. Soon, however, I realized that I was no longer in control. I could see, I could hear, I could feel. I could not open my mouth, so I could not scream or call for help. I could not stop, so I danced all around the room, gracefully without knocking anything off, for hours. My phone rang at some point, but I could not pick up. My feet and knees turned red because of the atrocious pain. I cried and growled in agony, suffering and dancing. Meanwhile, the screen of my computer was flashing strange symbols, and at some point, the tutor, Mosradale, interrupted the piano music, which made me freeze, but I was not released. Instead, I was standing on a toe, kept still in an unnatural position, and by a supernatural force. Rejoice, rejoice, daughter of mine. You have found your way to a new life that shall never end, she said, speaking slowly with an unnatural growling voice, and smiling so eerily that I could not really pay attention to the rest of her speech, also due to the unbearable pain. As soon as she stopped, the piano music and the dancing resumed. I was a prisoner in my own body. One of my friends came to the door, then to my window, seeing my shadow. She banged on the window and even called me on the phone, but ended up leaving in anger, as she thought that I was ignoring her. It is only when she came back later during the night with another friend that they understood that something was wrong. They broke the door and saw me crying and dancing, prompting them to stop the music. I immediately crumbled on the floor and burst into tears before being rushed to the hospital. It was not the end of it, of course. The video is gone, even in the browser history. The only people that can attest of its existence are the friends that rescued me. However, Mosradale still haunts me to this day. I can hear that voice in my head, even the piano song. And sometimes, I start dancing randomly out of control, and no matter where I am or what time it is. It has put me in troubles and in danger severally. My relatives and friends are thinking of sending me to a psychiatric facility, and I believe this is where I will disappear and slash or die like Betty and Keiko. About Keiko, do you remember me telling you that I did not know anything about Mosradale before being one of the victims? Well, it is only after doing my research that I noticed something strange. I once asked her husband if he could send me a picture of her, and almost jumped out of my window when he sent it through email. Mosradale on the video I watched was Keiko. Is it what that thing does? Will my appearance be used as Mosradale for the next victim? I hope not. I have received other emails of people claiming to have relatives that fell victim to Mosradale. One family from Spain said that they had a young cousin, Francisco, who was 13 years old when he was trying to study chemistry through a free and strange VHS tape in 1991. His experiment killed his whole family, including himself. They were found chanting strange incantations with their eyes rolled, after inhaling a bizarre orange smoke, and all died on their way to the hospital. I do not think I have enough time left to do research and report on that. They will have to continue without me. Are we safe in this world? How somebody can just apply for a job, go to an interview and never return? How can someone go to a date trying to find love and find death? How can someone visits a house for rent and end up being a permanent resident, killed and buried under concrete? We only wanted to learn. Was it a crime or too much to ask? Is it so easy to lose a life in this world? Well, this is Holga reporting and hoping to be the last victim of that entity. Please be careful, always, to the beautiful souls we loved and unfortunately lost. Spirit board. The police found her car parked on the side of I-70, abandoned. She was dead. Most people missing past 48 hours don't make it. We found her this morning in a wooded area. The dental records were a match. Yeah, it's her. How did? The autopsy hasn't been performed yet, but they're assuming it was blunt force trauma. There's an open investigation on details I can discuss. The phone went silent, and I nodded, in a daze, feeling sick to my stomach. I told the officer I had to leave, hanging up the phone. Walking into my living room, I grabbed a pillow, crying until my throat hurt and my eyes swollen. Come on, you have to pull yourself together. I blew my nose and hiccuped. The silence was pierced by a phone call. This is Detective Thompson. I know this is a difficult time for you, but can you come into the station for questioning? Calls from the local police department. I made some coffee and drank it black, enjoying its warmth and bitterness. My phone vibrated against me and answered. The tired officer on the other line. I told him that I passed out, and I was sorry and agreed to meet him in the afternoon for questioning. I reviewed my handiwork from the night before. A plain cedar board with ornate wooden letters carved into it. The sun and moon looked ornate. The yes and no were slightly off-center, but that didn't matter. I took some silver and gold paint and filled in the sun and moon before slapping a clear coat of lacquer over the board. Parker Brothers, eat your heart out. I got into my small silver car and left toward the police station, entering the office to a tired-looking officer with thinning hair. Candace Williams, I'm here to discuss the Lily Henderson case. The officer's eyes dropped. Ma'am, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm Detective Thompson. Please come on back to the office. The office was surprisingly cozy. A simple desk with a computer sat next to a few office chairs. I took a seat in one as the detective sat across from me. Ms. Williams, can I get you anything? A coffee or donut, perhaps? He smiled warmly. Coffee, if that's ok. Sure thing. He left the room and came back with a small paper cup. It ain't Starbucks, but it'll get the job done. I am so sorry for your loss. Any information that you have about Lily that will help us solve this case would be greatly appreciated. Do you know what happened to her? A tear fell from my eye. It's still under investigation. We're working to resolve this for you and her family. He lowered his head. Do you remember the last time you saw her? I racked my brain trying to remember when I last saw her. It was 3 weeks ago. We were going to meet up, and she never showed. I called her phone, she never answered. I thought she was busy. I should have checked in on her and have been a better friend. My chest tightened as tears clouded over my eyes. Candace, none of this is your fault. His tone calmed my frazzled nerves. I have a daughter, and I'm terrified of what could happen to her. Ma'am, I'm going to do everything I can to get this monster off the street, but you've got to help me. Does she mention anyone following her? Any stalkers or any jealous ex-boyfriends? Lily did mention her ex. His name was James Martin, I think. They had a major falling out and she stayed at my house for a few weeks. He had been harassing her online, but I never thought it would come to this. Do you know his address? What kind of vehicle he drove? Anything you can remember? A Toyota Tacoma, black. I don't remember a plate number. A flashback of the vision interrupted my thoughts. The black truck, the chains, the screaming. 663 yet. I think. I'm not 100% sure on it. It's ok. Anything you can remember. You're a great help. Do you want some water? You look a little bit peaked. I'll take some more coffee if you have it. You're going to be up all night. His warm nature made me smile in spite of myself as he refilled my cup of coffee and handed me a glazed donut. My stomach growled as I realized I forgot to eat since afternoon yesterday. Thank you, and it's ok. I work night shift. Understood. Do you remember anything else about James? He's a big guy, reddish-brown hair. He had a beard the last time I saw him. Lily would stay at my place to avoid him. He used to work at Wells Fargo with us before they had layoffs. Was he ever threatening towards you? Not to my face. He didn't like her hanging out with me. That's really all I have right now. Och, are you och to drive home? His eyes had a fatherly concern. I'll be och. If it makes you feel better, I can text you when I get home. I hate to impose. It's no problem. Nodding, I gathered my purse and left the station. I went home, scrolled on my phone to James's socials. They were full of the same misogynistic speeches, hunting pictures and the Confederate flag. But the photo of his truck and plate were in plain view. At sunset, I placed the spirit board on the middle of my altar and lit a black and red candle. Holding the planchette in my hands, I called Lily's name. It trembled as it floated to hello. Lily, is this you? I asked, my heart beating rapidly. Yes. Was James the one that killed you? Yes. My rage surged. We got him. I gave the police his plate number. He's going to go away for a long time. NOTGOODENOUGH. Asterisk asterisk, not enough. I'm doing all that I can. What more do you want? DEATECHEAINHELL. Asterisk asterisk, I hope he gets the death penalty. He needs to suffer. The planchette jumped in my hands once again. IOUCURSEHIM. I was a practicing witch, but I didn't curse people. Then again, I didn't need to curse anyone up until now. The murder of my best friend seemed a justified reason enough to. My kitchen started to shake and cabinet drawers opened and slammed shut. The air grew so cold I could see my breath in front of me. And at my feet there was my phone and a mason jar. Shaking, I picked them both up. I wasn't practiced in curses, but this was a place to start. Lighting some black candles and dragon's blood incense, my bedroom was filled with a soft glow and the scent of resin, wax, and roses. I wrote the name James Martin will suffer on a sticky note. Then I crossed out the vowels and repeating letters. Taking the remaining letters, I rearranged them into a cryptic glyph. Folding up the sigil, spat on it in the mason jar, and covered it with dirt before sealing the lid. I drove to a nearby river. In the past, I had volunteered and cleaned litter from its shores. I collected rocks from her banks. River spirit, I need your help. Take this jar and run its namesake to the bottom. May your water fill his breath, and may my sister have her vengeance. By the name of Hecate and Morrigan. The river carried it before bashing it into a boulder, breaking the jar into sharp shards before whisking it downstream. I prayed that the bastard would meet his end. Lily would pound on my walls every night and move my furniture. I went back to the spirit board, asking if there was anything she wanted, but it was the same message every time. The grief and lack of sleep were affecting my job. My boss told me to take some leave and provided me the number to a grief counselor. When I was younger, I used to bury myself in work to avoid pain, but now it only left me exhausted. I felt brittle, as though my whole world was breaking around me. I would give my testimony, and along with the evidence, James would be sentenced to death. My job was done. The curse was only an accelerant for the inevitable, except the trial would never come. I went back to the police office and asked for Officer Thompson. "Ms. Williams," said the detective. "Are you all right? You seem tired." "I am. Have you heard anything from James Martin?" Thompson looked back and forth. "I think you should come into my office. I'll get you some coffee." "Thank you," I said, as he led me back to a small, stuffy room shaded by blinds. "I'm technically not supposed to discuss this with civilians, but I know you were her friend." James volunteered his vehicle. The tire tracks don't match, and he has a fairly solid alibi. He was helping some family move some equipment. With his truck. Yes, his truck was out. That's why we don't have a lead. Did Lily have anyone else? Like anyone that was giving her the creeps, maybe on social media? No, her and James were constantly fighting. She never told me about anyone else. I'm sorry. Ma'am, I promise you we'll do everything we can. We're talking to her family. We'll let you know if anything changes if you do the same. I felt completely numb as I got into my car, as though I were on another plane of existence, slowly fading away. Rage welled up inside me, but not at the kindly old officer. He was just doing the best he could. James planned this out and dragged an innocent woman to death where no one could hear her scream. I needed to find proof. My phone vibrated with a text from an unregistered number. I know who you are. They do you on a T find your body. My heart froze in my chest as I looked for the number. But the message had disappeared. Fear burned into rage. The bastard wouldn't get away with this. I visited James once for a New Year's Eve party before he forbade Lily from talking to me. He lived on a farm with his parents, but in a separate house. I parked my car in a field at the far end of his property and passed through a wooded area with a sharp ravine. Clambering down the steep path, I crossed a wooden bridge over the river. The babble of the water over the stones calmed my jumpy nerves. Climbing up the steep slope, I followed the path out of the woods. The estate loomed in the distance. Rather than taking the dirt road, I walked through the pasture. A few sleepy cows walked past me, unbothered by my presence. Reaching the estate, I made my way to the enormous garage. The door was locked tight. The wind blew heavily against the garage, so heavy I had to brace myself. I ducked behind the structure as James walked out the door. Cursing under his breath, he opened the door to the garage. In the corner loomed a stack of tires lying next to a chain. The image of Lily being dragged down the dirt road flashed through my mind, and her screams made my flesh break out in a cold sweat. A ringing cell phone broke the silence. "Hello," said James over the phone. James's face fell. His skin paled as he ran back into the house. I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the evidence just as James screamed, as I took off running as fast as my legs would carry me. My lungs burned from the cold air as he was gained on me. My legs buckled under me as I made my way through the woods towards the ravine, the river churning beneath me. Turning around to face him, his eyes wide with surprise. "Why are you trespassing on my property, Candy?" The words caught in my throat. I was too scared to say anything as he inched towards me. "Now you're going to be a good girl and give me your phone. Or what? Why do you want my phone? If you have an alibi, you have nothing to worry about." His eyes went blank. "What I did to Lily will be nothing compared to what I'll do to you. Death, pain, hell." The words flashed through my mind. I listened to the river beneath me. James lunged towards me, but I caught him off balance. He fell sharply down the ravine, landing on a large rock in the river, his bones poking through his shattered leg as he screamed in pain. "Help." Smiling, I looked into his pleading eyes before pushing him into the current, not enough to sweep him away, but enough to drag the broken limb. His screams were exquisite as buzzards began to circle overhead. The drive home was peaceful, and I felt heavy and drowsy. For the last time, I rested my hands on the planchette as it drifted towards goodbye. I'm being replaced. I know the title sounds crazy. Hell, I may be crazy, but I need someone to know this before I'm gone. It all started last month when my friends and I went on a birthday road trip across Texas. We were all 21 or older now, so we bar hopped frequently and put our livers to work. But never mind that. The issue didn't start there. It started when I was driving late one night. I was the designated driver, the most sober of the bunch. We stopped in a little town I can't remember the name of. It was foresty and empty, lines of towering pine trees swaying in the gentle wind. I was driving at a slow pace, but it still seemed like a long while before I finally parked the van in an empty lot. The pavement was cracked and worn, and there weren't any buildings nearby that I could tell. I put the van in park and looked out the windshield. A sense of curiosity befell me, seeing the vast dark with trees just out of view. Impulsively, I decided to scope out the area. Everyone was sleeping, so I didn't see any reason not to. I crept out of the RV and into the darkness. Using my phone as a flashlight, I scanned the area. What I saw was nothing but trees and more trees. Above was a star-filled sky without light to corrupt it. Constellations in their ever-present poses, staring down at me with twinkling eyes. The chill of the night hit me then, and I felt a bit paranoid about coyotes or bears. Nothing I couldn't ignore. Though a bit on edge, I walked around the parking lot, taking effort not to step into the grass. My gaze met a fence line in the distance. It was just barely out of range of my light, and directly behind the RV. I mean, a bit of trespassing couldn't hurt, could it? You can probably guess how wrong I was, based on the very nature of this post. Anyway, I jumped the fence. On the other side, my sneakers sunk into muddy soil. I aimed my phone forward. Surrounded by brush and cattails, a small pond lay enclosed entirely within the fence. From what I could tell, its borders didn't extend much beyond it. I looked into the murky water, taking steps closer to it. It was then that I noticed a faint glow at the top of my vision. I don't know how I missed it. I looked up and jolted in surprise, though I was unable to run. I was frozen, staring at it. It, or perhaps I should say she, was floating above the water, her bare form glowing faintly. She was emitting light, her skin so pale it glowed, with long white hair wet and silky. I blinked. She remained. Her face was an assortment of features that one could only describe as beautiful. Though like in a dream, you couldn't entirely pinpoint her features. She flew towards me. I tried to run, but my feet got stuck in the mud, pulling me to the floor in wet disgust. I stared up at her, on my side, feeling like prey to something vile. Despite the beauty, I knew it was wrong. So wrong, I can't explain what she was, or if she was even real. I held my breath, and she came beside me. Kneeling, she took my face in her hands. The warmth of them radiated throughout my body, and they were soft. She spoke to me softly. I couldn't make out the words. Her voice was like bells, and pitches all overlaid into one, ringing pleasantly yet indecipherable in language. My heart felt as though it was trying to escape from my ribs. I didn't fight back despite every molecule of me screaming to run. I took a breath again as she leaned down to kiss my forehead, and suddenly all went black. I woke up soaking wet. I was on the floor of the van, morning seeping out the windows. Everyone was asleep. I sat up, rubbing my eyes before I remembered what I'd seen. The fear hit me like a bus, and I looked around carefully, examining each crevice and each face carefully as to make sure she wasn't hiding. I got to my feet quickly. I couldn't wake them, not when I had no idea whether or not what happened was real. Not when I was a sopping mess, hyperventilating and cold. I was hesitant to get out of the van again, but I did, bringing my change of clothes with me. There was no sign of danger. I wrung my clothes out and shook the water from my hair. My hands were pruned with moisture. I put on my new clothes and tried to step inside the van, but something stopped me. An intense nausea crawled its way up my stomach and to my throat. I swallowed, trying to keep it down, but it forced its way through me, and murky water escaped my mouth and splattered on the pavement below. I stood there dizzy, looking at the reflection of the sky in dirty water. Water. I couldn't understand why it was water. Something within me told me that this was a secret, something sickly and horrible that no one should know. I ignored that instinct. That afternoon, when my friends were up and I was 50 miles out of that town, I told them. We were eating McDonald's breakfast and lounging as they tried to nurse their hangovers. I saw something last night. I think I said, something paranormal. Amy laughed, trying not to choke on her hash brown. What? Jeremy and Heather looked at me the same way. They didn't believe me. I swear I saw something. It. The words escaped me. I felt my memories of it fade, and all that left was lingering fear. Look, dude, don't be scared. It was probably just a deer. The conversation didn't go on much longer than that. I remembered the event once I was finally home, when other symptoms began to show. It started with an itch. My skin felt endlessly uncomfortable, and I scratched my arms raw before I realized I should stop. I booked a doctor's appointment the next day. My doctor had nothing to say. He prescribed me an anti-itch cream and sent me on my way, even after I tried to tell him something was seriously wrong. He said, "Get some better sleep." And I did. But within my dreams, the thing called to me. Its language I could never decipher. It was slow-paced suffering until the third day. That's when the next symptoms began to show. Now I hear ringing bells, soft, like distant wind chimes forever swayed by a gentle breeze. My vision blurred with every note, and I could no longer sleep. The sound consumed my mind entirely. It kept me up until I was too exhausted to open my eyes. Whatever sickness this was, it was going to kill me. I'd decided that within a week of my infection, my brain feels like it's deteriorating. Each hour another memory fades. I wake up in the middle of doing things, calling my parents, writing notes, scrolling through my photos. It's like I'm pulled back into lucidity by my own fading will to survive. Texts get answered before I get the chance to. Nobody seems worried at all. It seems like whatever it is stealing my body and my mind entirely. This brings us to today, the day I'm sure I will die. It's not a kind of death where one would find my body rotting in my bed, mush on the mattress. It's a death of my mind, my consciousness, my soul. It ate away at every piece of me, gathering all the information it could until I had nothing left. Nothing but fading memories of who I love are. I can feel that it's all gone now. I can't remember my mother's face. I just want to be held again. Author's note. Hi, I've never posted here before, and I'd appreciate any constructive criticism you have. This is actually my first finished short story. Mr. Flanagan. I woke up to the sunlight tickling my face and the soft chirping of birds muffled by my window. I looked to my side and my wife Cheryl was still fast asleep, her dirty blonde hair covering her eyes and nose like a messy barricade. Even so, she still was breathtaking in her most vulnerable and unprepared state. I slowly moved my feet over the side of my bed, as mechanically as possible, trying not to wake my wife. As soon as I realized the stealth mission was a success, I stood up and tiptoed through the bedroom door and into the hall. I went straight to the kitchen with a pep in my step. I was going to make my lovely bride breakfast in bed. Am not a graceful person at all, so when I tell you it sounded like War of the Pots in the kitchen, in not lying. After every loud clang, I'd pause for a few minutes and wait to see if she'd call out to me, but she never did. I never understood how you slept so hard, it's almost noon, I said with a smile on my face. After about 45 minutes of intense cheffing, I triumphantly plated her bacon, eggs, and pancakes, grabbed the cup of OJ, and headed to the bedroom. Good morning, beautiful. Look who's finally awa. I paused mid-sentence because Cheryl looked like she was about to blow chunks. Are you okay, baby? I said, my voice raising slightly with concern. I feel so nauseous this morning, I don't know what's happening. What's that awful smell? She said, pinching her nose with her fingers. I looked at her confused. I don't smell anything, baby. Are you okay? I walked slowly and intently towards the bed plate and drink still occupying my hands. As soon as I sat down on the bed, she let loose. It's like a pressure was connected to her stomach. I shot up to my feet, barely containing vomit of my own. I quickly got dressed and rushed my wife to the car, leaving the forgotten breakfast on our bedside table. I practically had to carry her inside the ER. My heart was racing and my mind was flooded. Was my wife going to die? I pushed the thought out of my mind and gently sat her down in the waiting chair. Thankfully, it was fairly empty and there was no crowd or line at the check-in desk. What seems to be the issue? An older woman said in a monotone voice. My wife woke up this morning and threw up like the exorcist. She was perfectly normal yesterday. Do you think she's poisoned? Her self-expression changed from annoyed to extremely concerned. Hi, this is Janice. I need a nurse in the waiting room immediately, please, she said on her desk phone. I waited about 5 minutes before two nurses in smocks came down the hallway. One came to talk to us, and the other to the lady at the desk. I told the nurse the same thing I told the old woman. After a quick brief, the nurse talking to me turned around and waved the other one over. Does she need help walking, or do you think you'll be enough for her? The nurse asked in a sweet voice. I think I'll be fine to give her a hand. Do you know what's going on? I asked desperately. We think we have a good idea, but we need you to come with us to make sure. I helped my wife to her feet, and we followed the nurses down the cold, shiny hallways of the hospital. Finally, we reached a door, and we followed the nurses inside. In the corner of the room was a big machine hooked up to a screen, and next to it a hospital bed. Do you need help laying down, ma'am? One of the nurses said. No, I think I'll be fine. I might need a bucket just in case, though. Her attempt at humor was cut short by the obvious wave of nausea that shot through her body. We are gonna be using an ultrasound machine today to see if there are any abnormalities in your tummy, the nurse by the machine said. My mind was racing. Abnormalities. What could that even mean? All the horrible scenarios floated through my brain. I watched as the nurses helped lift my wife's shirt so her stomach was showing. One stood by her side while the other started turning on the machine and putting on gloves. I watched her apply the gel, and I did the stupidest thing ever. I closed my eyes. After what seemed like an eternity of painful silence and occasional chatter from the halls, one of the nurses said, just as we thought, Ma'am, you're pregnant. Congratulations to you both. My eyes shot open and met my wife's. I could see nothing but joy as her beautiful green eyes started to get teary. Is this real? I asked in disbelief. We had been trying for so long, and it finally happened. We were going to have a child. I left the hospital with my wife on my arm, and the sickness seemed to be gone from her body. We blared the radio all the way home, talking about names and where our kid would go to school. Life felt perfect. Then the voice started. Mr. Flanagan. I turned to my wife and asked if she heard anything. She declined and asked if I was okay. I nodded and smiled, then turned back to the road. I heard the voice again. I wasn't imagining it. When we got home, my wife said she needed a shower after everything. I completely understood since she had been feeling so unwell just hours before. She headed straight for the bathroom, and I heard the water turn on. I sat on the couch and turned on the TV. All I could think about was how good of parents we would be. We were going to raise this child with so much love. Mr. Flanagan. I paused the TV and looked around, startled. I waited, hoping it was just my imagination. Nothing happened. I chuckled nervously to myself, trying to brush it off. I pressed play on the remote and sank back into the couch, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I woke up to that same voice. Mr. Flanagan. I froze, my heart racing. The TV was still on, the movie I had fallen asleep to continuing without me. I paused it again and heard the shower still running. Annoyed, I stormed the bathroom, thinking maybe my wife was playing a joke on me. Who's Mr. Flanagan? I called out, leaning up against the bathroom door. The shower door slid open, and my wife peeked her head out. Mr. Flanagan, she asked, obviously confused. That's when I realized it wasn't her voice that had been speaking to me. My annoyance quickly turned to unease, and my wife must have seen it on my face. What's wrong, honey? She asked, concerned. As I began to back away, she leaped to all fours and darted toward me. I turned and ran as fast as I could up the hill and back to my car. My heart pounded. I could hear her right behind me, her hands and feet scrambling across the ground like an animal. Just before I made it to my car, I felt an impact on my back. She was on me, pushing and clawing. I fell to the ground and rolled across the road, throwing her off of me. I jumped to my feet just as she lunged at me. I leaped back and swung the flashlight, striking her in the head. She recoiled in pain and fell to the ground, sobbing. Please don't hurt me. I just needed help, she cried, holding her hands up in defense. I stepped back in confusion. What? You attacked me? I shouted. No, I just needed help. And you hit me, she sobbed. I shook my head. I'm not doing this. Stay back and I'll leave. I stepped back toward my car and opened the door. I only took my eyes off of her for a second, and suddenly she was on me again. She knocked me to the ground, slapping the flashlight away. She dug her nails into my shoulders and chest as she tried to get closer. Her eyes were wide, and her expression was wild. I couldn't push her off of me, so I wrapped my hands around her shoulders, pushing her away with all my strength. I struggled until she finally stopped moving. I pushed her off and looked at her in disbelief. She just looked like a regular woman now, though dirty and disheveled. I breathed heavily, feeling a mixture of relief and confusion. I had to get out of here. As I turned to get back into the car, I heard a strange laugh from behind me. I turned only to see that she was still lying on the ground, but her expression had changed. It was as though something was wrong, as though she wasn't who I thought she was. Please don't hurt me, she laughed again, her tone eerily calm. I froze. What are you? I whispered. Her head turned to face me, and her expression twisted. I'm what you will become. In an instant, she was back on her feet, moving faster than before. She lunged at me, wrapping her hands around my neck. My feet left the ground as she squeezed. I kicked and struggled, but I couldn't break free. Just as consciousness began to fade, I heard a loud noise, like a distant thunderclap, followed by a flash of light. I fell to the ground, gasping for air. I looked up to see the stunned look on her face as something struck her. She crumpled to the ground, and everything went silent. The company was called Eclipse Enterprises, and I'd never heard of it before. But the website looked impressive, with sleek graphics and a mission statement that sounded like it was written by a team of highly paid consultants. I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as I imagined myself working for such a respected company. The day of the interview arrived, and I woke up feeling like a kid on Christmas morning. I spent hours getting ready, carefully selecting my outfit and rehearsing my responses to common interview questions. As I headed out the door, I felt confident and prepared. The office building was located in a nondescript part of town, surrounded by rows of identical glass towers. I arrived early, and as I stepped into the lobby, I was greeted by a receptionist who looked like she'd just been plucked from a Tim Burton film. Her skin was pale and wan, and her eyes seemed to be sucking all the light out of the room. "Welcome to Eclipse Enterprises," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You must be here for the interview." I nodded, trying to hide my growing unease. There was something about the receptionist that didn't seem quite right. Maybe it was the way she seemed to be staring right through me, or the way her smile seemed to be hiding something. "Please, follow me," she said, her eyes glinting with an otherworldly intensity. I trailed behind her, my eyes scanning the empty corridors. Where was everyone? I had expected a bustling office, not this eerie silence. The air seemed to vibrate with an unsettling energy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. We stopped in front of a door with a small plaque that read "Interview Room." The receptionist pushed the door open and gestured for me to enter. As I stepped inside, I was struck by the starkness of the room. A single chair sat in the center, facing a large metal desk. And behind the desk, a lone figure waited. He was a tall, gaunt man with eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. His smile was wide and toothy, but it sent shivers down my spine. "Welcome," he said, his voice dripping with an unsettling enthusiasm. "I'm so glad you could make it. Please, have a seat." I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to turn and run, but my desire for the job kept me rooted to the spot. I sat down, trying to compose myself. The man began to speak, his words tumbling out in a rapid-fire sequence. I tried to follow, but my mind struggled to keep up. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. He asked me questions about my qualifications, my experience, and my goals. But there was something about the way he asked them that made me feel like I was being interrogated. His eyes seemed to be boring into my soul, searching for something hidden deep within. I tried to answer his questions as confidently as I could, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in way over my head. The man's intensity was unnerving, and I found myself growing more and more agitated by the minute. Suddenly, I felt a creeping sense of dread. I needed to get out of there, and fast. I tried to think of an excuse, but my mind was a blank. "I'm so sorry," I stammered, but I just realized I left my phone in the car. "May I step outside for a moment?" The man's smile faltered, and for a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, something dark and malevolent. But then, his smile returned, wider and more toothy than before. "Of course," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Please, take all the time you need." I leaped from the chair, my heart racing. As I turned to flee, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. The receptionist stood in the doorway, her eyes black as coal, and her skin gray as the stone. She was changing. Her body was contorting, twisting into impossible shapes. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. What was happening? What kind of place was this? And then, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, my head throbbing. The room was empty, the chair and desk gone. The door was open, and I stumbled out into the bright sunlight. As I looked back at the building, I realized that it was abandoned, the windows shattered, and the door hanging off its hinges. I stumbled away, my mind reeling with questions. What had just happened? Was it all some kind of twisted dream? As I walked, I noticed that my feet felt heavy, as if they were stuck to the ground. I looked down and saw that my shoes were covered in a thick black substance that seemed to be seeping up from the ground. I tried to shake it off, but it only seemed to spread, creeping up my legs and onto my skin. I felt a creeping sense of dread as I realized that I was being pulled back to the building, back to the horrors that lurked within. I tried to run, but my legs felt like lead, and I stumbled and fell. As I looked up, I saw the receptionist standing over me, her eyes black as coal, and her skin gray as the stone. She reached out a hand and touched my face, and I felt a wave of darkness wash over me. I was being pulled back to the abyss, back to the horrors that lurked within. But then, something inside me snapped. I remembered the words of a wise old man I had once met, who had told me that the only way to escape the darkness was to face it head-on. With newfound determination, I pushed myself up from the ground and faced the receptionist. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "I will not be pulled back. I will not be consumed." As I spoke, the black substance that had been seeping up from the ground began to recede, and I felt my legs grow strong once more. I took a step back, and then another and another, until I was running as fast as I could away from the building, away from the horrors that lurked within. I didn't stop running until I was blocks away, until I was sure that I had left the darkness behind. And even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unblinking eyes were trained on me, waiting for me to let my guard down. But I knew that I had escaped, that I had faced the darkness and come out on top. And with that knowledge, I walked on into the bright sunlight, ready to face whatever lay ahead. I have met the dream seller and honestly hope you never will. My name is Raul. I think. Or was it Michael? No, not that. Maybe Jordan. Focus. Please focus. I can't remember. Truth behold, I barely remember anything of who I am, or was at this point. I am pretty certain I used to be a mechanic at a local garage shop, or was I an accountant? I can only remember bits and pieces, a mesh of identities more akin to an abstract painting rather than a coherent being. Even now, I am struggling to pull on whatever information I can gather from the broken shards of my memories, so that I may warn you of the things I do remember. One thing I am certain of, however, I remember how I felt when I met him. The dream seller, hopeless, alone, scared of tomorrow. Why was I feeling like this? Did my wife divorce me? No, she died in a car accident a year ago. That or cancer. Point is, I still recall that I heard from someone, or seen somewhere, that there was someone that sold dreams. Promises of peace and quiet among restless nights of anger and sorrow. Whoever I am, all of my memories point that I was on a one-way road to collapse, and I thought, why not? Medication won't help me anyway. Maybe therapy. Despite everything, I still see them clear as day. The merchant of my supposed hopes. Whatever doubt I had about the legitimacy of what I was getting into disappeared when I put my eyes on them. I say them because I couldn't figure out what they were. They were humanoid, sure, but there was a certain air to them. Otherworldly. The face of an elderly man in 1 second, then one of a toddler. The build of a bodybuilder and the build of an actress, obese and anorexic, taller than a doorframe and barely able to get to my knees. Their voice, man and woman, sweet as poisoned honey, welcomed me to their humble abode filled with luxurious intricacies. I told them of my plight, whatever it was, and I have been told that they have just the thing. The dream of a billionaire, rich and satisfied. The price, of course, was a triviality. A simple story about me, such as what I ate yesterday or the last time I scratched my back. At the time, I thought it was a weird request, and so I obliged. With a smile, they told me I shall see my dream the next time I went to sleep, and by God I had that dream. I found myself in a private club, surrounded by my friends and lover, partying the night away in a place I didn't even know could exist, let alone step inside of it. Naturally, I wanted more. I sampled all sorts of dreams, powerful executives and hotshot actors, the quiet life of a family man with 2 children, a high schooler confessing to their crush, only to find there is mutual affection. Night after night, dream after dream, I was finally living. I was happy. What was I running from? The demands of the dream seller were always the same, yet they were different. Always a story, always something about myself that for some reason they were interested in. Over time, the stories became more complex and detailed. They asked me about my job, my love life, my hopes and dreams. I trusted them with my very being. And that was my mistake. Slowly, over time, the dreams started to blend in together. I kept forgetting, not being sure what was my life or what was my dream. It was too late when I realized what was going on. Mere minutes ago. Minutes. My addled mind saw through the disguise of that thing. I don't want to do this. I want it to stop. Please. Remember, who am I? I do not wish anyone to live through this living nightmare, to lose themselves in the dreams of others, to forget what made someone someone. I don't want to lose myself anymore. Whoever is going to read this, listen. Listen. Under no circumstances, however bad your life is, do not search for the... Wait, what was I talking about again? Think. All right. I wanted to tell you all about the dream seller. They provided me with some quality dreams to deal with my day-to-day life. In fact, I have been such a faithful customer. They agreed to come for a house call for once-in-a-lifetime specialized dream request. The last dream I will ever need is what they said. How exciting. So remember, if you are in a rut, there is someone out there willing to provide for you whatever you need. All they ask is for a simple story. Has anyone heard of the Traveler's Road? Have you ever come out of a daydream to realize you were driving? That you had ended up somewhere that requires making turns and stops, but you can't really remember making those turns or stops. You just suddenly realize, holy shit, I'm driving. Well, that's how it started. I was on my way home from college for the holidays. It was a drive I had made half a dozen times at this point. So naturally I had become pretty familiar with the road. My mind was somewhere a million miles away when I finally noticed the road ahead of me. I looked down at my hands on the steering wheel. I had been gripping it like a vice. The clock on my dash read 12:00 a.m. Shit. How long had I been driving on autopilot? I tried to remember, but my mind felt so groggy. The last thing I could remember was flying down the road, jamming out to Paranoid by Black Sabbath. Now, though, nothing looked familiar. I was seriously tired. I needed to stop and get an energy drink or something. I looked further on up the road, but beyond the headlights was just pure blackness. Hopefully, there would be a gas station or something within the next few miles. I seriously needed a pick-me-up. After a few more miles, and no sign of civilization, I began to wonder where the hell I actually was. I should have been on Highway 9, which was the last stretch before I made it back home. At least that's where I thought I should have been. But the farther I drove, the longer the empty darkness went on, the more convinced I became that somewhere along the way I had made a wrong turn. I reached into my pocket for my phone, but it wasn't there. Confused, I began to search around the inside of my car, but all I could see was a few discarded food wrappers and a half-drank bottle of Gatorade. I decided to pull over and search for the little black dependency brick. I had never been very navigationally inclined. Honestly, I think I depend on Google Maps entirely too much, but right now I didn't care. I was lost and needed directions. After about 5 minutes of scrounging around under the seats and between the center console, I realized my phone was gone. I had no idea where I had lost it. Maybe I had left it back at my dorm, or maybe it fell out of my pocket somewhere. I didn't know. The only thing to do now, I guessed, was to just keep on driving and hope I find somewhere to stop and ask for directions. I reached down to turn up the radio, but was met with only silence. I sighed. The radio in my car had crapped out on me a while back, and I thought I had fixed it. Apparently not well enough, though. The next hour or so of driving was going to be mind-numbingly dull without tunes. I glanced down at the clock on the dash and sighed. Oh great, I thought. Now the clock is busted too. The numbers still showed 12:00 a.m. I shook my head. Baby, I love you, but you have some serious issues. My car was my pride and joy, even if she had seen better days. A 1991 Camaro ours. It was white with red racing stripes. The paint job was custom, but had seen better days. Not to mention that the radiator was held together with JB Weld, and it had over 200,000 miles on the engine. Needless to say, the old girl could use some TLC. That is, when I could afford it. I shrugged off my worries about the time and the radio and kept on driving. Eventually, up ahead in the distance, I thought I could make out a faint light. As I drove on, the solitary beacon grew brighter and brighter. A lighthouse shining in a sea of night. After what felt like miles and miles, the light finally resolved into a bright neon sign. The sign had a long green snake looped around fiery red words, the Midway Saloon. I pulled into the parking and thought it looked about like any other dive bar I had ever seen. There were a handful of classic cars and Harley Davidsons parked out front, but the thing that stood out the most was standing there hitched to a post staring at me. It wasn't too unusual to see horses at bars. This was the South after all. But this horse was different. It was absolutely massive, solid black with a gleaming black saddle. The way the big animal's eyes reflected the light almost seemed to make them glow. I parked next to an old Cadillac and stepped out onto the gravel lot. The warm air seemed to grow cooler under the giant horse's gaze. It watched me all the way to the door, the glow in its eyes never faltering. Stepping through the saloon doors, I was met with the familiar smell of cigarette smoke and spilled beer. A jukebox in the corner played a song I had heard at least 100 times. For some reason I couldn't place it. The patrons played pool, darts, and leaned against the bar talking loudly. The bartender looked up from behind the bar. He was a big guy in a crisp white shirt and rolled up sleeves. He had a bushy beard and dark slicked back hair. He put down the glass he had been cleaning and met my eyes. New around here, huh? Well, what can I get you? I nodded. Oh yeah. Actually, I'm just passing through, but I'm not really sure where here is. He smiled and shook his head. Passing through. That's a good one. I sat down at the bar, and ordered a beer. So, I'm trying to get to Highway 9. But I think I made a wrong turn somewhere. Could you tell me how to get to where I need to be? The bartender shook his head and sat the beer in front of me. No, I can't tell you that. I can tell you, however, you are a long way from where you want to be. What does that mean? I asked. The big man just smiled and went back to cleaning the same glass. I glanced around the bar, noticing the way the people were dressed. It was like some crazy decades party or something. In one corner, I saw a guy dressed like a 1950s greaser, playing darts with a guy who looked like a 90s punk rocker, blue mohawk and everything. At the other end of the bar sat what looked like a Wall Street banker talking with a couple Civil War reenactors. You all having a costume party or something? I asked the bartender. He just smiled at me again and continued cleaning the glass. I shook my head and took a sip of my beer. Glancing around the bar again, I noticed a man sitting alone in one dark corner. He had a long black coat and a wide-brimmed cowboy hat. Is that the guy who owns that beast of a horse out there? I asked, motioning to the man. The bartender stopped cleaning the glass as the bar went silent. I could feel every eye in the room fixed on me. Almost every eye. I looked around at the people surrounding me, then to the back of the room, where the man sat alone. His dark hat tilted up as he looked at me. He had the same cold glow in his eyes I had seen in the horse outside. I felt a chill run up my spine, and my skin grew hot under that gaze. He didn't just look at me, he looked into me. It was like he could see down to my soul, to the very fiber of my being. I felt panic rising from nowhere. Just then I felt an iron grip on my arm. I turned away from that unnatural gaze and looked at the bartender. You had best be on your way, son. I nodded and stood up from the bar. Which way do I go? I asked. His face took on a grim countenance. Just keep following the road. I nodded. What do I owe you for the beer? Smiling warmly again, he said, first one's always free. I frowned at that, and he went back to cleaning the glass. As he did, the commotion of the bar resumed, as if it had never stopped. I stood and looked back up the road, but I couldn't see anything. I heard him first, heavy footsteps accompanied by the sound of something tapping. Then, out of the darkness, a pair of cold, glowing eyes appeared. He was coming, and I wasn't going to wait around to see what he wanted. I just needed to get out of there. I jumped over the smoldering ash pile and into my car. I stomped on the gas pedal and raced across the bridge, hoping to find a way off this road. As I left the forested area, I pressed the accelerator even harder. The needle on the speedometer climbed -85, then 100, then 120. I pushed the pedal to the floor and screamed out all my fear, anger, and frustration. Time and miles blurred together as I never stopped. Several times, I encountered things that tried to make me stop. A tree in the road, a hitchhiker waving for me to pull over, another rickety bridge. None of it mattered. I had to keep going. I swerved around or drove over whatever was in my way. My car took a beating, but it never slowed. I caught glimpses of the figure again, and I think he even chased after me once. But I didn't care. I just kept driving. Whatever this place was, it had to have an end somewhere, a way out, or a way back, or something. I just had to keep driving, driving, driving. Eventually, I woke up in the parking lot of a cafe. Glancing around, I saw several cars and a big sign out front that said Al's. Through the window, I could see people sitting inside, eating, chatting, going about their business. Had it all been a dream? Yeah, it must have been a dream. A long, terrible dream. I stepped out of my car, feeling groggy and exhausted, like I had just woken up from a restless night. I pushed open the cafe door and heard the bell jingle. At the counter, I motioned to the waitress, and she came over. "Hey there, what'll it be?" she asked. I smiled up at her. I could really use a coffee. She nodded, coming right up. She set a white mug on the counter and filled it with steaming coffee. I inhaled the aroma, feeling comforted. I couldn't believe I was finally out of that nightmare. "Do you want sugar with that?" she asked, her friendly smile in place. No, I don't," I replied, a bit distracted. She smiled again and nodded, then turned back to the kitchen. I must still be a little out of it, I thought, shaking my head. I took a sip from the mug, and immediately I pulled it away, coughing. The coffee, it didn't taste right. It was wrong. I stared at the mug, and my stomach dropped. What had been coffee was now something else. Dark, murky liquid with a strong metallic smell. I stumbled back from the counter, knocking over the stool, and the room erupted into laughter. The laughter echoed in my ears, but something about it felt wrong, almost like it was mocking me. I looked at the faces around me, and my heart froze. The people, everyone in the cafe, had stopped laughing. Their expressions had shifted, becoming cold and unwelcoming. They all stood up as one, their eyes fixed on me, their smiles now gone, replaced with something more intense. The trucker in the corner spoke first, his voice low. "You're different." The waitress, still smiling, added, "We don't get many like you here." A little girl in a booth, "Not nearly often enough." An elderly man at the counter, "The halfways always." A young woman at the register, "Taste." The cook by the flat top, "So." A mother of 3 by the door, "Much." All as one, "Sweeter." I stood there, petrified as the moment stretched. I have to get out of here now. I ran for it. I was going to shove and punch and kick every single one of these fuckers out of my way if I had to. I didn't make it past the first one. It was a middle-aged balding man who looked like he weighed maybe 120 ibs. I tried to shove him and run past, but his skin was like one of those sticky mouse traps, and my arm got immediately stuck against his face. I tried to rip myself free, but the others began closing in around me, their hands reaching out to take hold of me. I could feel dozens of hands sticking to me and pulling from every direction. I didn't know what would break first, my body or my mind. I screamed in fear, and the assembly howled in joy. Just as I thought I would be ripped limb from limb, thunder boomed through the diner over and over again. The tacky hands began falling away, and I collapsed to the floor. As I lay there trying to catch my breath, I felt a different set of hands of me. Large, ice-cold hands. I felt myself being pulled to my feet and dragged through the diner and out into the parking lot. As I was thrown to the ground, I looked up at my savior and winced under the glare of those eyes. This was the closest I had seen him, and it was horrible. His skin was pale and sunken, like an aging corpse, and his white hair hung in strands down to his shoulders. He glared down at me and pointed one long finger. "Stay." His voice was deep and gravely, full of both age and power. He turned and started back to the diner, pulling 2 massive revolvers from his belt. Through the window of the cafe, I saw the corpses climbing to their feet. Most of them had large chunks missing from their bodies. One after another, the bodies began falling into each other. They clumped together in a fleshy, gore-coated mass, arms and legs and mouths jutting out in all directions. The mass began shifting its way to the door. All of the thing's eyes were still fixed on me. The pale gunslinger kicked the door open and began firing both thundering revolvers, knocking the thing back and blowing off massive chunks of smoldering flesh. I didn't stay to watch the rest. Even though he had saved my ass twice now, he still filled me with a kind of dread that was all-consuming. I jumped to my feet and ran around the massive black horse between me and my car. I cranked the engine to life and floored it away from the cafe and on down the road. I kept driving and driving and driving. Time lost all meaning. I never got hungry, never got thirsty, never stopped driving. I believed that I had found my way to hell. My suspicion was confirmed hundreds of miles later when I saw a bright neon sign up ahead in the distance, the Midway. I stood there on the gravel lot, staring up at the sign, the glow of the neon painting the night in shades of red and green. Only now could I see the snake for what it really was, an Ouroboros, the paradoxical serpent, forever eating its own tail. There was no end to the road, no end, no beginning, just an eternal loop of misery and darkness. I stared at the sign, my eyes following the coils of the snake around and around. My mind cracked even further, and I began to laugh. I doubled over and fell to the ground, laughing harder and harder, and for a while I just slipped away. I don't know how long I lay there like that. After a time, I came back to myself. Sitting up from the cold ground and climbing to my feet, I made my way to the door and pushed through it. The bartender looked up from wiping down the bar top. Back so soon. I numbly walked over to the bar, sat down on a stool, and met his eyes. I tried to speak, but I had no voice. If you can hear me, follow the light. I did, or at least I tried to. Good, said the voice. Can you tell me your name? I blinked over and over again. My eyes were so dry. Hey, I think he's coming out of it. The voice was calling to someone else. Reality slammed back into place. I was on my back, with a flashlight in my face, surrounded by paramedics. I turned my head to look around. Someone told me not to move, but I had to see. My car was wrapped around a tree about 20 feet away. What time is it? I asked. The paramedic leaning over me looked down at her watch and said, 12:01. I felt tears burning in my eyes. I was alive. You must have been having some dream, said the paramedic as I was loaded into the ambulance. You were talking about bars and monsters and gunslingers. I think I would have liked to see that. I smiled, despite the pain I was in. Yeah, some dream. I'm just glad it's over. It was a dream, wasn't it? That's what I tell myself anyway. It had to be a dream. The heavy jingling footsteps I heard as they closed the ambulance doors were just in my head. Weren't they? My mom died quite suddenly and unexpectedly of a hospital infection about 4 months ago. But that, if you can believe it, wasn't the worst thing. And her younger sister, my bubbly bright aunt, took up with my dad less than 2 months after her death. But that wasn't the worst thing either. The worst was yet to come. It started on a dull evening. I just had supper with my aunt and dad, barely able to stand her friendly chatter about school. I went upstairs to my room as soon as I could to do my homework. I stared at my laptop screen, pretending to look at my assignment. But in reality, I was swooning in grief and missing Mom. I couldn't concentrate on anything since she died. I minimized the assignment tab and looked at the photo I used as background. It was taken a few years ago, a happy family occasion, my mom and aunt sitting side by side. So like yet unlike, my dad next to Mom, and I was leaning against him. All of us were smiling. Mom had both her arms stretched out around her sister and her husband. The chat box in the bottom left-hand corner of my screen began flashing. I was mildly surprised. It was an older app that no one really used anymore. I had been meaning to delete it. And then I froze. Mom's little image blinked in the chat box. And then the words popped up. Hello, Thelma. It's me, Mom. Fear gripped my throat. I knew it must be some hacking thing or stupid error, but I was paralyzed. I turned around and glanced at my bedroom door. It was closed, although the sounds of TV from the living room still came wafting in. Aunt Claudia had the TV on whenever she was downstairs, even if she was not watching it. Don't be scared, Thelma. It's really me. I found a way to talk to you, my darling, precious child. I've been missing you so much. If this was a hacker's joke, it was the cruelest joke in the world. Against my will, tears began welling in my eyes, spilling out. Oh, my darling, please don't cry. It's awk, and it's no use crying anyway. I need you to save that energy. My fingers still stiff from fear, I managed to type out a response. Mom, what do you mean? Is that you really? I could sense her familiar frustration rushing back through the laptop, same as when she felt I wasn't being smart or strong enough when she was alive. Of course, Thelma, it's me. And I've come back to tell you something important. I had my own important news to share. Did you know Aunt Claudia moved in last weekend? Yes, Thelma, I know. And this is what gave me the strength to come and tell you. Please be strong. I know you are a strong girl, and you can deal with this. I am sorry you have to. But you have to know. I have to tell you. She can't have everything. My life, man, house, child. A different kind of fear took over me. Mom, what do I mean? Thelma, I'm sorry to put this on you like this. I don't know what else to do. You have to know. Aunt Claudia murdered me. The bottom of my world gave way as I dropped into a dark hole of dread and fear. I felt as if I had known this all along, all through the past 4 months. Ever since that awful night when Aunt Claudia called from the hospital, where she worked, to talk to Dad. I just couldn't say it. Thelma, are you listening to me? If I had any doubts that the laptop chat was really my mom, those words dispelled them. I heard them in the exact voice she always used to say those very words to me. Yes, Mom. But how? She was at the hospital, you know. When I went in, she wasn't on my floor, but it was very easy for her to arrange for me to pick up an infection. Thelma. The door opened, and Aunt Claudia poked her head in. I gave a little scream and frantically minimized the chat box. Aunt Claudia stepped forward. Oh, honey, you look like you've seen a ghost. Are you ok? Wordlessly, I nodded. Aunt Claudia sighed. Thelma, sweetheart, I miss your mom too, but this moping isn't doing you any good. It's hurting your dad, you know. Do you want him to suffer more? I shrugged. I couldn't speak. I looked up at her. The light was odd on her face. She looked more like Mom than ever before, but also not. And these clothes, Thelma. She reached out and touched my black sleeve, and I flinched back, as though she had hit me. She frowned, and for an instant I thought she was actually going to slap me. But then she smiled and said, I know girls your age like to wear black all over, but what do you say, me? And you have a trip to the mall, and pick you up some nice new gear. On me. Simon, sweetheart, it will be so much fun. I shook my head furiously. Tears of rage, grief, and fear splatter out. Aunt Claudia began again, oh, Thelma. But then she stopped and went quiet. I looked up at her face. She was pale and had a horrible expression. She was staring at my laptop. I followed her line of sight, turning around to look at my screen. The photo had changed. There was a new photo in background, showing Mom seemingly asleep in a hospital bed, and Aunt Claudia by her side, bent over her. Aunt Claudia seemed to jolt into life. Her face twisted into a terrible snarl. She screamed, Are you playing tricks on me? And she lunged towards me. I cringed back in my chair, raising my hands to defend myself against her onslaught. But before she could even touch me, a bolt of electricity sprang out of the laptop, hit her square in the chest, and she dropped dead to the floor. I shrieked in terror. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Dad and I had to move from that town. Losing 2 wives in 4 months isn't a good look for anyone. Even though the police combed through our house and statements and the laptop and the electricity up and down, they eventually had to put it down to a freak accident which happened when I asked my aunt for help to get my laptop working. Dad never remarried, and I never heard from Mom again.